Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. You know, there was an old American Express TV commercial, maybe some of you remember it. It's a while ago. It featured people who wanted to buy something or solve a dilemma of some kind, and of course, they were able to use their American Express card to help them on their way. And the commercials always ended, "Membership has its privileges." Maybe some of you know that one. And there are benefits to many kinds of membership. These days, probably not many view their credit cards as a real benefit, but maybe just a tool at best for what they need. But people are more likely to see value in being part of something like a member of an athletic club, a museum, maybe a professional organization, or even as a subscriber to a video streaming service, something like that. But we love our benefits. Before my wife Maria went to seminary, she worked for a few years out of college as a statistician for CAA, the sister company of AAA. And we've been lifelong members of AAA since we've been married. And whenever we're on vacation, I will ask, various organizations that we're going to, museums or tourist sites, if they have a AAA discount. $1 off. Yes, we got it. And in some organizations, there are higher levels of membership, right? Premium membership, and you get access to even better benefits. And you might get those benefits by paying more up front, or by being a member longer, or maybe even by being an influencer or a VIP of some kind. You can work your way up, and you can get more and more inside access and privileges. And so that old slogan, membership has its privileges, kind of resonates with us. But in today's passage, Jesus sets out a different perspective, and it comes from something he witnesses happening on the road between the disciples. Two of his disciples are arguing with each other on the way to Capernaum, and Jesus overhears some of it. And he asks them, "What were you arguing about?" And it's kind of an embarrassing question, right? Because Mark's description captures it, and in response, he says they were silent, for on the way they had argued with one another who was the greatest. It's kind of like if you imagine like brothers and sisters in the back seat fighting with each other. "I'm the best. No, I'm the best." Jesus sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." Membership in the church, or really better yet, discipleship, being a follower of Jesus, has no privileges except to serve. Knowing that we're loved by God, forgiven, promised a life that begins now and continues forever. I suppose you could call those benefits, and yet Jesus offers those to anyone in faith, regardless of any kind of official membership. But Jesus says the true test of greatness isn't found in anyone's status or position or the level of benefits that they have access to, but being disciples and students of Jesus and members of God's family is ultimately about serving. And the slogan is this: whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. If you've been around church a lot, chances are you've heard those words. That's nothing new. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record Jesus speaking those words. But it's a revolutionary way of seeing ourselves and others that may kind of lose its impact if we stop thinking about it. We're so conditioned to seeing our participation in most things as having a reward all the time. Even when we give to public radio or TV, we love that mug that they give us, right? Or maybe we don't care as much about the perks, but we just want to have an impact in our lives. And there again, we assume, maybe based on what we see elsewhere, that to have an impact, you need to have influence and status. The truth so often is that the amount of power and status and financial resources you have does seem to matter. So if you want to have an impact, you've got to climb to the top somehow. And it's high-minded and lovely to think that being a servant of all is a great thing. It's wonderful to lift that up in principle, but do we really have time for that? And, can we afford that? And if we put in all that effort, are we going to receive recognition for it? These are the natural questions. These are real questions that people like us and maybe the disciples might ask. And that seems to be what the disciples were focused on. That's the way they were thinking. Jesus was predicting that he would be betrayed, killed, and resurrected, but all of that was going completely over their heads. It just didn't register or compute or match up with anything they were concerned about. They were looking ahead to challenging and occupying government in Jerusalem and bringing a social and spiritual revolution to their land. They missed the part of Jesus saying that things weren't going to happen as they expected. Jesus saw things differently. The reality they saw was the occupation of Israel by Rome. The healing and solutions they needed were more worldly, so they thought. Change would come with the Messiah, kind of super king, divinely anointed, sent by God, and that's how peace and a prosperous life was expected to come. That was one picture of what the Messiah was going to look like. But there was another picture of the Messiah found in passages like we hear from the prophet Isaiah, the suffering servant, one who would come to bring a new kingdom, but a different kind of kingdom. A kingdom that would be rejected by most in authority, but would actually expand beyond imagination. Kind of like those parables Jesus talked about, that invasive mustard seed, or like yeast mixed into flour. It just kind of gets into things without being seen and expands and grows and has an impact beyond anyone's comprehension. And one way to think about it is that Jesus was playing a long game, not a short game. In the centuries after Jesus, Roman leaders like Nero would try to use physical force and persecution to eliminate Christians. Even though Christians were impacted significantly by that, Christians actually ended up growing and flourishing all the more over time. Jesus knew that God's kingdom doesn't come through the use of all the usual contemporary levers and tools. God brings transformation and healing through other means that are under the radar. They seem insignificant and useless to some, even weak. Spiritual practices and mindsets, individual devotion lived out through personal actions and relationships, a deep hope that may become weary at times, but can never be fully extinguished. The disciples were arguing about which of them was going to be Jesus' right-hand man when he came into power and have the influence and benefits that came with it. They didn't have a clue yet about the nature of Christ's kingdom or how it really worked. Jesus wasn't training them to be those kinds of leaders. He was training them to embody his spirit and follow in his teachings. Now, that's so high-minded as to be almost irrelevant to some. But if you want the same results, use the same solutions. If you want miraculous results, use spiritual solutions. In trying to model the Spirit to the disciples, Jesus uses the example of children. He took a child into his arms and said, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." What do you think the disciples thought about children? It was probably pretty similar to how others viewed children in that day. They were a bother and an interruption, but Jesus saw it differently. In an account similar to our gospel today in Matthew, people brought little children to Jesus to place his hands on them and pray for them. And the disciples rebuked them, and Jesus corrected them and said, "Let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Jesus saw children who had the least power and status in that society, and taught his disciples to welcome them and love them and to see their great value. So the question Jesus wants each of us to answer is, how will we serve? Serving can happen in every setting, in every relationship, in every job, in every level and station of life. It's not so much a question of specific tasks that we should do, but it's about our perspective and mentality and how we live that out. Is our life about us, or is it our life about others? How do you use whatever influence and position you have in life to work for the common good ultimately? How will you do the right thing for others, even when you may not receive a benefit directly? How can you serve family or friends through your care and concern? How can you serve coworkers by assisting them or relieving them of a task at a critical point in the day? How can you serve someone who's not easy to like? Wherever you find yourself, you can discover ways to serve if your eyes are open to it. Whether you're someone who has a lot of influence or no influence, you can serve. Whether you're wealthy or poor, you can serve. When we place the needs of others ahead of our own without an expectation of benefits, we become servant of all. We place others first and ourselves last. That doesn't mean we shouldn't take care of ourselves, we should, but it's an outward focus rather than an inward one ultimately. As a congregation, we provide opportunities to serve, to be engaged in giving to worthy organizations, to join with partners like Treehouse Minnetonka, ICA Food Shelf, Urban Ventures, helping those in need. But these are just some of the ways that all of us are called to make an impact. You are uniquely gifted and have opportunities to bring a servant focus in the organizations where you work, in the places where you live. Because of that, no one has the same chance as you do to make a difference that could impact people in our community and around the world. Take time every week to put faith at the center of your life, to collect your thoughts in the presence of God, to make the perspective of Jesus your own. With all the changes we've had to life, including church over the pandemic, this series offers us a chance to review what it is that we need to recommit to. It's not so much about the benefits we stand to gain as it is about the privilege to serve and grow in faith as a people. And there are three things we can focus on as members and disciples. First, as I talked about last week, our focus is always on Jesus as the center of our devotion and faith. Make a commitment to regular worship, whether that's here in the sanctuary or online, as a way to keep that front and center for you and to build up our mission. Your engagement matters, your participation matters. Second, approach life and work with the commitment to serve in the unique ways that you've been gifted. No one can make an impact like you can in the places where you live and work. No one can serve like you can, as we're called to do as Christians, in the way that you can. And of course, there are ways to serve here in our ministry on Sundays and in cultivating relationships with our community partners. And finally, as we'll talk about more next week, be a part of community. Join a group. Help build up our life together. Accompany others on their journey. Marge talked about the book study related to mental health coming up. Wellness is a big part of our vision here at All Saints. It's a great way to build community here. Jesus, service, and community. Those are the three things each of us are called to be about in this time. This is what it looks like to be a member of this faith community in 2021 as we continue with our mission. This is what each of us needs to be about. And so the question is, are you in? If so, join us next week for our final message in our series. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.